This is the story of Barabbas, a rebel, a fighter, and a man tangled in a battle between justice and pride. But it's more than just a story about anger and mistakes. It's a story about a love so powerful it steps in and takes the punishment we deserve. Because Jesus took our place so that we could walk free, even when we didn't deserve it. And Barabbas' life would be the proof that even the worst moments can be met with unexpected mercy. The night was thick with heat and smoke. Jerusalem slept behind shuttered windows, unaware of the shadows slipping through its streets. Barabbas pressed his back against a crumbling stone wall and waited. In the moonlight, his breath came in shallow bursts. Sweat trickled down his neck. His heart pounded harder than the soldiers' drums at the fortress. "You sure about this?" whispered Eli, one of his men, from the alley beside him. "In and out," Barabbas muttered. "They won't even know what hit them." The merchant's house stood ahead. Whitewashed walls. A heavy cedar door. Inside, gold coins, stolen from the people by Roman taxes. Barabbas knew because he had watched, planned, waited, not for greed. That's what he told himself, not for himself. It was for the cause, for freedom. He nodded to Eli. They moved fast, silent. Predators in the dark. The door gave way with a soft grunt. Inside, the house smelled of oil lamps and warm bread. Too easy. They rushed in. Barabbas's hands found the coin chest immediately, tucked beneath a table. Heavy, beautiful. Victory! But then, a scream. A scuffle. Eli knocking over a vase. Footsteps pounding down a hallway. The merchant appeared, bleary-eyed, furious, and carrying a knife. "Thieves!" he roared. In the chaos, Barabbas acted without thinking. He slammed the chest into the merchant's chest. The man staggered backward, crashed into the stone wall, collapsed, motionless. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Eli stared. "Barabbas, what did you do?" Barabbas's chest heaved. He didn't answer. He just grabbed the coins and ran. They disappeared into the night. Shouts rising behind them, a horn sounding alarm near the Roman quarter. Barabbas ran until the walls of Jerusalem blurred into nothing but shadows and rage. Ran until his legs gave out and he collapsed in an olive grove, gasping for air, blood pounding in his ears. He told himself it didn't matter. The man had stood in the way. He was part of the system, but even as he tried to bury it, the truth dug into his chest like a dagger. This wasn't freedom. This was murder. And somewhere deep inside, Barabbas knew. He hadn't just stolen coins that night. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Barabbas didn't run far enough. No one ever did when Rome came looking. It was barely 2 days later when the soldiers found him. A flash of silver in the night, the snap of leather sandals against stone, the iron ring of swords being drawn. They cornered him in a crumbling courtyard near the edge of the city. "Barabbas!" barked the captain. "By order of Pilate, you're under arrest for murder, theft, and rebellion." Barabbas didn't waste time arguing, didn't beg, didn't plead. He fought, swinging fists, kicking, throwing elbows, desperate, wild. But it was useless. They outnumbered him 5-1. A club struck the side of his head. The world spun. Rough hands wrenched his arms behind him. Cold shackles bit into his wrists. Blood ran down his face as they dragged him through the streets like a trophy. The crowd stared. Some spat. Some cursed. Some just shook their heads and muttered, "Another rebel crushed." They threw him into the fortress prison, a pit cut into the rock deeper than daylight. The smell hit him first. Rotten food, sweat, mildew. The door clanged shut behind him, and the darkness swallowed him whole. For hours, maybe days, he lay there, barely moving. Every breath scraped his lungs. Every heartbeat pounded in his skull. In the next cell over, another prisoner moaned in fever. Somewhere farther down the tunnel, chains clinked as men shifted restlessly in their sleep. Barabbas pressed his forehead to the cold wall, tried not to think, tried not to remember the merchant's broken body, tried not to imagine the cross they were surely building for him. But memories are stubborn. They crawl up from the cracks in the stone when you least expect it. Then, one morning, he heard something new. Whispers. Two guards leaned against the bars of another cell, talking low. The Galilean's finally been brought in. You mean the prophet? Yeah, the one who heals the blind and feeds crowds with nothing but bread and prayer. Pilate doesn't know what to do with him. Barabbas barely listened at first, too wrapped up in his own coming death. But the guards kept talking, and one word pierced the darkness like a dagger. King. Some call him the King of the Jews, said one. A king? Sneered the other. Looks more like a lamb waiting for slaughter. Barabbas's eyes snapped open. A king! A king locked up like him? A king with no army, no weapons, no fight? He snorted and leaned back against the wall. Another fool crushed under Rome's heel, another dreamer dragged from hope to humiliation. Just like him. Or so he thought. For now, the sound of shouting rose like smoke into the sky. From the pit of the prison, Barabbas heard it, louder than before. Not the usual chants of Roman soldiers. This was different. A crowd gathered outside the fortress, roaring, pushing, demanding. He sat up, heart pounding. Chains rattled. Footsteps thundered down the corridor. The guards were coming. Please, not yet. Not today, he thought, jaw clenched. The cell door flew open. Sunlight stabbed into the darkness. Two guards stormed in, grabbing him by the arms. Where are we going? Barabbas barked, resisting. To the platform, one grunted. Pilate's offering a choice. They dragged him up stone stairs, through twisting corridors. Every window they passed echoed with noise from the crowd. Crucify him! Let Barabbas go! No, release Jesus. Barabbas froze. What had they just said? His name? Someone shouted his name? He stumbled as the guards shoved him forward, up onto a raised platform above the crowd. The brightness of the daylight hit him like a blow. He blinked hard. And there, standing just a few feet away, was the Galilean. Jesus. He wasn't what Barabbas expected. No armor, no chains, no hatred in his eyes, just bruises, blood, a crown of thorns pressed into his scalp, and a strange stillness. Pilate stood between them, sweating under his Roman robes. He raised his hands, trying to quiet the crowd. You know the custom, he shouted. Each year, I release one prisoner to you. Today, I give you a choice. This man, Barabbas, the rebel and murderer. Pilate pointed at Barabbas, whose face twisted in a scowl. Or Jesus, called the Christ. The crowd didn't wait. They roared, Barabbas! Give us Barabbas! Crucify Jesus! Barabbas stared, mouth dry, ears ringing. He looked to the side. Jesus didn't flinch, didn't protest, didn't even look at the crowd. He looked at Barabbas, not with anger, not with fear, but something worse, compassion. Barabbas's chest tightened. He looked away, fists clenched. Why would this man look at me like that? Pilate sighed, raising his hands again. So be it. Release Barabbas. And take Jesus to be crucified. The crowd cheered. The guards unlocked his chains. They fell away like dead snakes. Barabbas stumbled down the steps, dazed, free, released. But the sound of Jesus being led away, the jeering, the whip crack, followed him like a shadow. He should have felt victorious. He should have run. But as he looked back at the broken man who stood in his place, Barabbas felt something he hadn't felt in years. Uneasy. Barabbas ran. Feet slamming against the dusty road, lungs burning, mind spinning. The crowd behind him roared like a beast. He didn't care what they were shouting now. He was free. The guards had let him go. His chains were gone. He sprinted through back alleys and marketplaces until he collapsed behind an old stone wall outside the city. Heart racing, palms bloody from the rough stones. He had escaped death. He should have been celebrating. Instead, he sat in the dirt and shook, because every time he closed his eyes, he saw the other man, Jesus, standing there, silent, bleeding, looking at him with eyes that didn't accuse, but didn't excuse either. Why didn't he say anything? Barabbas muttered. Why didn't he fight back? Why didn't he blame me? He pounded his fist against the ground. He took my cross. He took my place. Eli found him later that night, crouched in the shadows. They let you go, Eli said breathlessly. I couldn't believe it. Everyone thought it was over. Barabbas didn't speak. We can get out of here, Eli went on. Start again. Maybe Galilee or the Decapolis. No more hiding. Barabbas shook his head. You saw him, didn't you? Eli frowned. Who? Jesus, the one they chose to kill. Yeah, Eli said, hesitating. What about him? Barabbas stared into the firelight. He looked at me. Eli didn't understand. He joked. He laughed. He shrugged it off. But Barabbas couldn't forget. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. Not with the images replaying in his mind like a nightmare he couldn't shake. The moment the crowd shouted his name, the sound of the chains hitting the stone, the silence of Jesus as the soldiers closed in on him. Barabbas had lived through dozens of escapes, but this was the first one that didn't feel like freedom. He should have fought, Barabbas whispered to the dark. He should have run. Why didn't he? No answer came. Only the wind whispering through the olive trees. And Barabbas, the rebel, the murderer, the free man, sat with his head in his hands, more chained than ever. Barabbas should have run far from the city. He knew how to vanish, how to fade into desert paths and disappear among the rebel hideouts in the hills, but his feet refused. He stayed near the city gates, hidden in shadow, watching. The streets were swollen with people. Soldiers shoved through the crowds, and behind them came the sound of something heavy being dragged over stone, wood. Barabbas stepped closer, staying low behind a broken wall. Then he saw it. Jesus! The man who had stood beside him on the platform now staggered under the weight of a splintered crossbeam. his back torn open, blood smeared down his legs, thorns jammed deep into his scalp, but he didn't scream, he didn't curse. He just kept walking, one step, then another, then another. Barabbas stared, frozen. The guards laughed and kicked at Jesus' heels. A few women wept at the side of the road. Most of the crowd just stared. Some shouted cruel names. Look at your king now. He saved others. Let him save himself. Barabbas' throat went dry. He wanted to look away. He couldn't, because that cross should have been his. He turned sharply, ducking into an alley, his heart pounding. He had to stop watching, had to forget, had to bury this moment like the rest, but his feet kept turning back. He followed the crowd, always on the edge, slipping behind baskets, under awnings, behind carts. Just close enough to see him, they climbed Golgotha Hill, the place of the skull. Barabbas knew it well. It was where Rome made examples of men like him. Jesus fell to his knees. A soldier barked something and kicked him hard. Another man, a stranger from Cyrene, was yanked out of the crowd and forced to carry the beam. Jesus rose again, one final climb. Barabbas stood at the base of the hill now, trembling, watching as they stretched Jesus out on the wood, hammered nails through his wrists, lifted the cross upright with a sickening thud into the ground. Barabbas took a step back, then another, then stopped. "Why did you take my place?" he whispered. "You didn't even know me." And from that hill, as the sky began to darken, Jesus looked down, his body broken, his eyes full of agony, and yet full of something else, compassion. Even now, even here. Barabbas turned and ran. Not from the Romans this time, but from a question he didn't know how to answer. What kind of man would die for me? Barabbas didn't sleep. Not the first night, not the second. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the hammer rise, the cross slam, the blood spill. And worst of all, he saw those eyes, eyes that had every right to accuse him, but didn't. On the third night, Barabbas stood outside a small home in the lower part of the city. The door was cracked open and voices whispered from inside. They buried him just before sundown. I saw them roll the stone into place myself. And his mother, she hasn't said a word since. Barabbas stepped back, hiding in the shadows. These were his followers. He didn't know what he expected. Celebration? Revenge? Numbered just answers. He waited until the voices faded and the house went quiet. Then quietly, he approached. The door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, oil lamps glowed low on the walls. A woman turned sharply, startled. An older man stood and reached for a walking stick. "Who are you?" the woman asked, stepping in front of a younger girl. "What do you want?" Barabbas raised both hands. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. I was the one they set free." The room went still. "Barabbas," the man said slowly. "You're him." Barabbas nodded. "I need to understand. Why did he say nothing? Why did he take my place?" The woman's expression softened. She stepped aside. "Sit," she said. "You should hear what he told us." And for the first time in his life, Barabbas listened, really listened. They told him about the parables, about the miracles, about the crowds who were fed, the lepers who were healed, the sinners who were forgiven. They told him how he had warned them that he would die, and how he called himself the Lamb. Barabbas shifted uncomfortably. "A lamb?" he said. "Lambs don't fight. Lambs are weak." The old man shook his head. "Not weak," he said softly. "Willing." Barabbas felt something sharp twist in his chest. "He said he came to lay down his life for many," the girl added. "For thieves, for rebels, for enemies." She looked straight at him. "For you." Barabbas stood suddenly, breath shallow. "I shouldn't be free," he said. "I shouldn't be here." The old man looked at him gently. "And yet, you are. What you do with that freedom next, that's up to you." Barabbas stepped into the night, his head spinning. His hands still bore scars from the shackles. But somehow, something else inside him was beginning to shake loose too. Not fear, not pride. Something deeper, conviction. Barabbas left the house with his mind on fire. He walked the streets of Jerusalem long after most torches had burned out and shutters had closed tight. The stories wouldn't leave him alone. Miracles, forgiveness. A man who healed lepers with a touch and forgave Roman soldiers. A man who walked straight into death for people like him. Barabbas wanted to forget it. He tried. He wandered back to the familiar places. The alley, where he first stole a loaf of bread. The broken fence behind the tax house, where he used to meet with rebels. The tavern that once echoed with his laughter and shouts. But it all felt different now. Smaller. Darker. Lonelier. Inside the tavern, Eli was back, sitting with a few of the old crew. Drinking. Plotting. Shouting about how the Romans hadn't seen the last of them. Barabbas sat down quietly, listening. "Pilate's weak," Eli said. "Next Passover, we take the fortress. We'll burn the market, draw them out. We still have weapons hidden in the caves." Barabbas stared at his drink. The wine tasted bitter, burned his throat. "What about you?" Eli asked, slapping him on the shoulder. "Barabbas the legend, ready to lead again?" Barabbas shook his head slowly. "You didn't see what I saw." Eli scoffed. "I saw you walk free. And that prophet die in your place. You got lucky." Barabbas's fist clenched around the cup. "It wasn't luck. It was something else." The table went quiet. "You've gone soft," one man muttered. "Been listening to those Jesus people," another spat. "Next thing we know, you'll be preaching." Barabbas stood up. "You're right," he said. "I've changed." He tossed the cup aside. "But not because I'm afraid. Because I saw a man take my punishment without lifting a finger to stop it." He turned and walked out, leaving the tavern behind him. Eli called after him, but Barabbas didn't turn back. Outside, the city was buzzing. Even at dawn, people gathered in groups, whispering, arguing. A market vendor caught his sleeve. "Did you hear?" she said breathlessly. "They say his tomb, it's open. That the body's missing. That he's alive." Barabbas froze. "Who?" he asked, though he already knew. "Jesus," she whispered, "the one who died in your place." Barabbas ran. Down narrow streets, past weeping women, past temple guards barking at each other. He followed the crowd through the garden path, all the way to the tomb. But it wasn't just the stone that had been rolled away. It was the truth that hit him like thunder. The Roman seal was shattered, the guards were gone, and the tomb was empty. A man nearby was explaining to a group of shocked bystanders. The women came at sunrise. The stone was rolled back. Angels, they said, shining men, said he wasn't here. Barabbas stepped closer, jaw tight. "And the body?" he asked. "Did anyone take it?" The man turned to him, eyes wide. "No," he said. "He said he would rise again." "And they say he did." Barabbas stared into the dark opening of the tomb. The silence inside was deeper than death, and somehow filled with life. For the first time since his chains were removed, Barabbas wept, not from fear, not from guilt, but from the realization the man who took his place was stronger than the grave. Barabbas didn't speak for hours. He sat just outside the garden tomb as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Birds sang. Children ran past on the road. Jerusalem carried on, unaware that everything had changed. Barabbas had always thought freedom meant escape from Rome, from chains, from judgment. But now he sat on the other side of freedom and felt undone. "Why?" he whispered again. "Why me?" A woman passed by, her eyes red from crying, but glowing. She paused when she saw him. "Were you there?" she asked softly. Barabbas looked up. "At the hill. Yes." She smiled through her tears. "So was I. I saw him breathe his last. And now I've seen him walk again." Barabbas blinked. "You saw him? Alive?" She nodded. "He said, 'Go and tell them I live.'" Barabbas stood slowly, almost stumbling. "Where is he? Where did he go?" The woman touched his arm gently. "To Galilee, I think, but he's not hard to find." She smiled. "You just have to want to be found." She walked away, and Barabbas stood there. No longer a fugitive, no longer a fighter, no longer a man who could ignore what had been done for him. He left the garden. Not in chains, not running, but walking slowly, like a man carrying something heavier than guilt and lighter than mercy. He wandered through the alleys of Jerusalem, listening to voices, whispers of hope, stories of fishermen claiming to have seen him, of Thomas asking for proof, of Peter weeping and being forgiven. Everywhere he went, the same name kept rising like smoke from a fire that refused to go out: Jesus. That night, Barabbas sat near the fire alone. He hadn't slept in days, but he didn't feel tired. He thought of the crosses, 3 of them, one for a thief, one for a murderer, and one for a savior, and only one walked away alive. He took a stick and began drawing in the dirt at his feet. Circles, lines. Then finally, a cross. He stared at it, not as a weapon, not as a punishment, but as a gift. "You took mine," he whispered, "and gave me a life I didn't even ask for." His voice cracked. "I don't know how to deserve it, but I want to follow you. Even if it means laying down everything." Barabbas had never prayed before. Not really. But something shifted in the air. The fire flickered brighter. The wind slowed. And for the first time since walking free, Barabbas felt like a man who had finally left the... Barabbas didn't return to the hills, didn't go back to the rebels, didn't sneak off into the shadows like he used to. Instead, he did something completely unfamiliar. He started looking for people of peace. He heard rumors of where they gathered, behind bakeries, at wells before sunrise, in the upper rooms of kind strangers. They met like refugees with glowing eyes, whispers of hope rising off their shoulders like steam. One night, he followed the faint trail of singing, not loud, not boastful, just a gentle hum under the cover of darkness. It led him to a courtyard where oil lamps flickered softly and men and women sat in a circle praying. Barabbas hung back in the shadows, not sure if he belonged, until one voice spoke his name. "You're the one who walked free." Barabbas stepped forward, heart racing. A man with graying hair and a kind face stood. He looked familiar. "You were beside him that day," Barabbas said. "You're one of his, aren't you?" The man nodded. "I am. My name is Nathaniel." Barabbas lowered his voice. "I need to know who he really was." Nathaniel studied him, then stepped aside and gestured for him to sit. Barabbas hesitated, then did something he hadn't done since boyhood. He sat at someone else's feet, and they told him stories about Jesus calming storms with a word, about blind men leaping for joy, about the time he wept at a friend's tomb before raising him from the dead. Barabbas listened like a starving man at a feast. Every word chipped away at the wall around his heart. Then someone else spoke, a woman, her voice soft but steady. "He forgave me when no one else would even look at me." Barabbas looked up. "Why?" She smiled through her tears. "Because he sees more than your past. He sees your worth, even when you don't." Barabbas swallowed hard. The guilt was still there, curled deep in his chest. But this time, it wasn't in control. He stood, facing the circle. "I don't know why he took my place. I don't know why he said nothing. But I'm tired of running. And if he gave his life for mine, then I want to spend mine finding out what that means." Silence. Then a man in the circle nodded slowly. "Then you're not a prisoner anymore, Barabbas. You're a follower." Barabbas didn't smile. Not yet, but something inside him began to breathe again. For the first time, he knew. He wasn't just a man who escaped death. He was a man who had stepped into something new, and that meant the journey was only just beginning. The next week passed in strange silence. Barabbas found himself waking early, not to run, not to fight, but to walk, to listen. To watch the sun rise over rooftops and wonder how it still came up the same after what had happened on Golgotha. He helped carry water for an old widow. He shared bread with a family that didn't know his name. He sat in the back of gatherings and listened to the disciples speak with fire in their eyes. He didn't talk much, not yet. He still didn't feel like one of them, but they didn't push him away. One afternoon, as he walked past a row of shops near the Damascus gate, he heard it. "So this is where you've been hiding." The voice sliced through the air like a blade. Barabbas turned, and there he was, Dagon, his old contact, one of the men who'd smuggled swords through temple corridors and sent messages into rebel camps. Barabbas hadn't seen him since the arrest. "I thought you were dead," Dagon said, arms crossed. "I thought the Romans had you nailed to wood." Barabbas didn't answer, didn't move. He just watched. Dagon stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We need you. There's a meeting tonight. Cave above the southern ridge." "The others think you're finished, but I told them. Barabbas never quits." Barabbas shook his head slowly. I'm done. That fight's not mine anymore. Dagon blinked. What? Since when do you run from a fight? What? Did they break you in that prison? Barabbas stayed quiet. Dagon's voice dropped to a sneer. Or was it that preacher you stood next to? The bleeding Galilean? Barabbas's jaw clenched. Don't say his name like that. Dagon laughed. Oh no, they got to you. You're one of them now. The dreamers, the peace preachers. He stepped even closer. They'll kill you, you know. Those Romans. They don't care if you kneel or burn incense or hug beggars. You were dangerous when you made them bleed. Now you're just pathetic. Barabbas didn't respond. He turned to walk away. But Dagon called after him. You had power, Barabbas. They feared your name. Now look at you. No sword, no fire, no purpose. Barabbas stopped in his tracks, then turned, stepped toward him slowly. Number, now I have a name I didn't earn, and a life I didn't deserve. So, if you're asking if I'm weaker, then yes. I laid down the sword because someone laid down his life for mine. Dagon scoffed. You're a fool. Barabbas didn't flinch. Maybe, but I'm a free one. He walked away, this time not out of fear, but out of resolve. His hands still shook when he reached the city gate. Not because of Dagon's threats, but because he hadn't fought back. And for a man like Barabbas, that was a miracle in itself. He stood by the road as the sun began to set, burning gold behind the olive trees. A voice stirred in his memory. You are no longer a slave. You are free. And in that moment, Barabbas finally believed it. Word traveled faster than fire. They said he was alive, not just missing, not hidden, alive. Some said they'd seen him on the road, others in the upper room, behind locked doors. And now, someone whispered, he'd gone to Galilee. Barabbas had never gone that far north, but he didn't hesitate. He followed the road for days, through dry hills and cool valleys, past vineyards and quiet farms, and always listening, always watching. He didn't know what he'd say if he found Jesus, didn't know if he could speak at all. What do you say to someone who died for you? What do you say to someone who chose your cross? On the fourth day, just after dawn, Barabbas crested a hill near the Sea of Galilee and froze. There, on the shoreline, stood a small group of men, casting nets, laughing, passing bread, simple, peaceful, and among them was him, Jesus, alive, laughing, hands still scarred, but eyes just as clear, just as fierce. Barabbas dropped behind a rock, his chest tight with fear. He wasn't ready. He couldn't face him. But Jesus turned, looked right where Barabbas hid, and smiled. It was a small smile, like he already knew, already understood. Barabbas stood slowly, heart racing. Every part of him wanted to turn and run. But Jesus lifted a hand, not to summon him, just to welcome him. No pressure, no demand, just an invitation. Barabbas took one step, then another, then one more. He didn't say a word, just walked until he stood a few paces away from the man who had taken his place. Jesus didn't speak either, not at first. He just looked at him. Right through him, like he saw every lie, every wound, every chain, and loved him anyway. Barabbas opened his mouth, but his voice cracked. "I don't understand." Jesus tilted his head gently. "You don't have to. You just have to follow." Barabbas dropped to his knees, not in shame, but in surrender. And in that moment, finally, Barabbas understood what true freedom felt like. It wasn't escape. It wasn't a sword. It wasn't revenge or rebellion. It was this: to kneel before the one who took your place and still welcomes you home. Barabbas stayed on his knees for a long time. The waves lapped gently at the shore. The other men, Jesus' followers, gave him space. They knew what this moment was. They had lived it too. Finally, Jesus stepped forward. He didn't speak like a general or glare like a judge. He knelt in front of Barabbas, eye level, no distance. And then he simply said, "You were never forgotten." Barabbas' breath caught. "I don't deserve this." Jesus nodded once. "You're right, you don't. But I give it anyway." Barabbas looked away, ashamed. "I took lives," he whispered. "Yours should have been the one spared, not mine." Jesus leaned closer. "But mine was given freely." Barabbas wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, still trembling. "Why?" Jesus stood, looked out over the water. "Because the story of freedom isn't about what's earned. It's about what's received." The sky was turning gold now, a new morning. Barabbas sat beside Jesus and watched the water reflect the dawn. Peter walked over and handed him a piece of bread and dried fish, said nothing, just smiled. That day, Barabbas didn't leave the shoreline. He listened. He laughed once or twice. He asked questions. And the disciples, men who had once fled in fear, welcomed him like family. They didn't treat him like a criminal, or a threat, or a rumor. They treated him like a man redeemed. He helped push a boat into the water, helped fix a broken net, and when they prayed, he didn't hide in the corner anymore. He closed his eyes. And for the first time in his life, he prayed too. Not with fancy words, not with a preacher's voice, just a simple prayer from a simple man. "Thank you for saving me. Even when I was unworthy, even when I didn't ask, even when I didn't understand." The wind stirred gently. A seagull cried overhead, and Barabbas smiled. Not because his past was erased, but because it no longer defined him. He didn't know where Jesus would go next, didn't know what it would mean to follow, but he knew this: he was done running. He was done hiding. He was done pretending to be free while still carrying invisible chains. Now he was something else, something new, something unexpected, a living testimony that mercy still wins. Barabbas had never stood in front of a crowd without fear. In his past life, he had shouted through alleyways during riots. He had cursed in back rooms of taverns. He had rallied rebels from behind masks, his voice raw with anger and pride. But this was different. The followers of Jesus had gathered in a vineyard just outside the city. Some were poor, some wealthy. Some had once been possessed. Some had once worn priestly robes. Now they were all the same, free and forgiven, drawn together by the man who took their place. And someone asked a question. Were you the one? The one who was freed instead of him? All eyes turned to Barabbas. The old fear rose in his throat like smoke, the shame, the guilt, the memory of the crowd screaming his name. But something steadied him, something stronger than fear. He stood, hands trembling, and spoke. "I never wanted to be known for this. I never thought I'd be standing here at all." He paused, took a deep breath. "My name is Barabbas. I was a rebel, a murderer. I lived by the sword and expected to die by it. I was guilty? He wasn't." The crowd was silent. Not a single bird chirped in the vines above them. I was dragged into the light, ready to be nailed to wood, and he stood beside me, bloodied, bruised, and silent. They gave the crowd a choice, and they chose me. Barabbas looked at the ground. "I don't know why. I didn't ask for mercy. I didn't deserve it." He looked up again, eyes glassy. "But I received it." He turned toward the sea of faces in front of him, men and women with different scars, different failures, different roads. And if there's anyone here who thinks they've fallen too far, who believes their past disqualifies them from grace, look at me. I took his place, but he gave me his instead. A woman near the back began to weep. A boy gripped his mother's hand. A man near the edge of the vineyard slowly sat down, covering his face. Barabbas stepped forward. I don't know why he chose to stay silent while I went free. But I do know what I'm going to do with the freedom he gave me. I'm going to live like he's still standing beside me. Because even if I don't see him, I know he's there. And I'll tell his story as long as I live. A soft voice broke the silence. Peter's. He stood at the edge of the crowd, smiling. He said we'd be his witnesses. You just became one. Barabbas sat back down, exhausted, unburdened. He had carried shame like a boulder on his back for too long, but now he was just a man with a story that might just set someone else free. Barabbas left the vineyard in silence, not because he had nothing more to say, but because he had said everything that mattered. The road that led down from the gathering wound through olive groves and old Roman paths. Barabbas walked it slowly, not in hiding this time, but in thought. The wind brushed through the trees like a quiet song. He passed an old man mending a broken cartwheel and stopped to help, lifting the wood as if it were nothing. "Thank you, traveler," the old man said. "What's your name?" Barabbas hesitated, then smiled. Just a man who was supposed to die, but didn't. He didn't need to explain. Not anymore. By nightfall, he returned to the edge of the city. He passed the place where he used to meet with rebels, now abandoned. The wall where he had been dragged, bruised and beaten, now overgrown with vines. And finally, Golgotha. He hadn't been back there since that day. But something had pulled him. Not guilt this time. Not shame. But something deeper. He climbed the hill slowly. The crosses were gone now. All that remained were the holes in the earth where the posts had once stood. And the silence. Barabbas knelt by the hole where his own cross had been meant to stand. He placed his palm over the scarred earth, and he wept. Not loud, not with rage, but with a kind of freedom only known by those who should have died and didn't. "This was supposed to be mine," he whispered, "and you took it. Not just the wood, not just the pain, but the punishment." A breeze moved over the hill like a sigh. And suddenly, he wasn't alone. Not in the physical sense, but in the way that you know someone is near when your soul gets still. "I don't know how to repay you," Barabbas said to the quiet, But I'll live like I remember. I'll live like I'm yours." He stood again, taller, not proud, but free. And as the stars began to appear, Barabbas did what he never imagined he would. He knelt one more time and lifted his arms, not in surrender, but in worship. He left Golgotha that night with nothing but a small satchel and a heart full of fire. And for years after, stories began to spread of a man, once known for murder, now known for mercy. Of a rebel who walked beside apostles, of a sinner who became a servant. Some said he traveled with the early church. Others said he helped fugitives escape Rome's sword. Some whispered he died a martyr, refusing to denounce the one who took his place. No one really knows how it ended for Barabbas, but those who heard his story, those who saw the fire in his eyes when he spoke the name of Jesus, they remembered. They remembered the man who walked free so that others would understand what grace really means.